Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Matt the Family Guy, Kent the Cat Guy, and me, Greg the Single Guy. We are recording episodes from around the globe to tell you about the best kept secret in education. That's right, it's teaching overseas. We're glad to have you join us. All right, welcome to this episode of the International Teacher Podcast. This is Greg the Single Guy, I believe, and Matt the Family Guy is not here. We have a different Matt today. We'll introduce him in just a second, and we have Kent the Cat Guy. And Kent, I am so excited about this episode. Do you know why?
Why are you excited, Greg?
Because I think these guys, our new guests, coined the phrase "the new normal" before COVID. I don't know. I'm telling everybody that. They have a book. They have 2 books out, and I think they have a third on the way. And this is Matt and Kevin. They're coming to us respectively from Thailand, where Matt is, and Kevin's dialing in from Spain. So welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. It's great to be here.
Tell us where you both are from originally.
Go ahead, Kevin.
All right. I'm originally from a small town south of Nashville in Tennessee, and then have been teaching overseas for 16 out of the last 20 years.
And I am from Chicago. I've been overseas for the last 15 years, teaching for 14 of those, and currently enjoying a gap year.
So take me back just a bit. So Kevin, you're living in Tennessee, you become a teacher. What are you teaching then?
So I actually first started teaching in Texas. I went to grad school in California, then I moved to Houston for 4 years, and there I was teaching a little bit of everything, 7 classes out of 8. So every day, 46-minute classes. It was I taught the first 7 periods of the day, and then thankfully I had the 8th period off. So first period was middle school boys basketball, but then after that, 2nd through 7th was geography, history, and humanities in different orders.
Matt, what did you start off teaching?
I started in the year 2000. I was teaching in a suburb of Chicago. I used to teach 4th grade. And then a very good friend of mine named Craig Taffel, he's an international teacher at the Shanghai American School. He actually started telling me about this whole idea of teaching in another country, teaching internationally, and basically said, imagine taking our current school, because we were in the same district in Chicago, and he said, imagine taking that, picking it up, and plopping it in the middle of a rice field in China, and you've got this amazing, well-resourced school, and you're doing exactly what you normally do, but you're making incredible money, you're traveling the world, and you're meeting very like-minded people. So that's how I got started on the journey in 2008.
Kevin, what drove you to packing the bags and checking out the world?
There were a few things, but I was teaching in Houston, but I'd still not finished my degree in California. And so what happened is when I went to graduate in California, I met 2 different people that were teaching overseas within a span of 1 month. I met somebody that was teaching in Shanghai at a totally different school than where Matt his friend was, and then I met somebody right next to me at graduation that was teaching in a Department of Defense school in Frankfurt. And so within a month, I'm like, wait, I can do this thing that I'm doing in the U.S. overseas. And then that next February, I was at a job fair in Iowa.
That's exactly why we call this the best kept secret in education, right? And we just came up with that for, 2 years ago we started the podcast. It is really a secret, and you guys have been doing it ever since, right? Well, now you have a gap year.
Yep, we both have gap years, but once we made the move, we haven't moved back, although I might be moving back in this next year. But yeah, we've been overseas for well over a decade.
Oh, that's a whole nother conversation about moving back, isn't it? I mean,
yep.
I don't know if I can ever have that conversation. Maybe Kent can talk to you about that. Kent has a question. I can tell it on his face.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, Matt, your journey sounds a little bit like mine. I was working at the Pacific Science Center in Seattle in the year 2000, and there was a guy there who had been in Kuwait for a number of years in the 90s teaching, and he told me what a great experience he had there. And so that kind of stuck in my brain for about 7 years before I finally made the move myself. And it sounds like it kind of played out that way for you too.
That's exactly right. When my buddy moved, and he basically said to me, "You've got to get a passport," because I didn't even have a passport at that point. I was 23 years old, just out of college, and just started my first teaching job when I met him. And he moved that following August. And I told him, all right, as long as you show me around, then I'm up for it, but never traveled before. I don't have a passport, don't know what I'm doing. And I came to life. As soon as I started traveling, I could feel this excitement. I saw how other people responded to travel. And for me, I felt like I was alive and I was excited and I wanted more adventure. And every time he would come home, he'd tell me more and more stories about where he had traveled and just how great the school was. So yeah, it took, kind of like you, Kent, it took me about 7 more years where I had to kind of, think about it, get excited about it, and finally I got courageous enough to make the leap, and I haven't looked back ever since.
Kevin, tell us some of the countries and schools you've been at over your years.
So once I left Houston, I started at the Country Day School in San Jose, Costa Rica, and then went to the Korea International School in Songnam, South Korea. Then went to AIS Guangzhou in Guangzhou, China. And then the last 5 years before this gap year was at the Lincoln School in Buenos Aires.
Matt, some of your destinations?
Well, I started at the Korea International School, which is where I met Kevin. And then I went to St. Andrew's School in Rayong, Thailand. And then after that, I went to Colombia for 5 years. I was in Medellin. And then after Colombia, I was in Shanghai at the Shanghai American School for 5 years. And that's where I just finished up before taking this gap year. And next year, I am off to Nido de Aguilas in Santiago, Chile.
Wow. Oh, Kent, do I get to go now? Kent is doing a nice formal interview for both of you guys. I'm a little bit more off the cuff. I had reached out to both of you because I had read both your books. And both of your books, your first one came out in 2019, am I correct?
First one was 2017.
Like I said, 2017, your first book came out. And then you published your second, and all of the proceeds go to Children of Haiti. Am I correct? Okay. I'm getting nods from both of these. Excellent. Yeah, it's still weird without having video, isn't it?
Let me jump in there, Greg.
Okay, jump. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say...
that's it for the interview. Go ahead, bye.
Thanks.
Take it
was
away.
I supposed to push record? We'll call this a practice. How did you guys choose Haiti as a place to share some of the proceeds of the book sales?
Well, I was a couple of summers. I was going to the PTC in Miami, the Principals Training Center, getting a certificate in international leadership, and I met Bambi Betts, who was she's the one who started the PTC, and is also, I believe, started Thai Online, which I know you guys have talked about in previous podcasts. She was talking about this Children of Haiti project. They were looking for schools that might be interested in doing some philanthropic work or partnering up and sponsoring students to go through this school in Haiti that they started. Kevin and I talked about it, and we thought it was not only a great cause, but also a very reputable group of people, international educators who are doing some great things and giving back. And I got to give Kevin all the credit here because he's the one who had the idea of finding a way for us to give back. I mean, really, this whole project was his idea. He's the brains behind it, and he also was the brains behind donating the money and helping out and giving back for a number of years. We've received so much from being overseas, and now we're finally able to give back in a small way.
Kevin, would you call this mainly a labor of love? Something that just an important value that you have with this project?
Yeah, I mean, I think we both really enjoyed collecting stories separately. Like, we both love storytelling, and we've gotten into both oral and written stories, and we also wanted to know people's experiences overseas. And so it was really, even though it was a lot of work putting the two books together, we both really enjoyed, first of all, like, it gave us, Matt and I were in different countries at that time. It gave us an excuse to connect and to catch up frequently. But more importantly, it was really great for us to collect these stories and then to have the understanding that the money will go to something beyond us. And so we really appreciated kind of every aspect of the project.
All right. So, Kevin, when did you and Matt meet? In what country were you teaching together?
Yeah, we met in 2008, starting at the Korea International School, and that was a growing school at the time. They had just been on a new campus and were opening up new facilities. So we started with, I think, 50 new teachers from around the world. But Matt and I happened to be in the same building and really hit it off, and that's where we met.
Well, I love it because, and it's a similar story to how Matt, the family guy, and I started our podcast. We met in Venezuela with his family. He was with his family, his wife and his child, and I was alone there. But we went off in different directions. He went to the Middle East, and I went to Switzerland. They sort of recruited me to come to the school, and then I had the fortunate experience to meet up with Kent. Kent had the unfortunate experience to meet up with me. So the three of us have put together this podcast, which is exactly what your book series is sort of doing in another way. We're not raising money. We're not monetized in any way. But our goal is to share experiences and share what our secret of teaching is all about, whether they're from the States or from other places. It's a chance for us to share stories. When I opened up your book, you guys, and the first book is called The New Normal. It's a set of stories collected by you guys, but I wanted to read a little bit from it. It says, here's a quote from your book: "Each tale provides several brushstrokes on a canvas that will, by the time you finish reading, represent the real lives of many teaching abroad." I think that's perfect. And I think that's what our podcast is all about. When I open up the book, I immediately see, after the introduction, I see a picture of each of you, and I can't remember. I think it was Kevin, your father. You each have a picture with your father on the page, which is so cool, right? Because family's so important. Which one of you had the father that has has a teacher T-shirt on? It says, "The truly educated never graduate."
That was my dad. He so between the first and second books, both of our fathers passed away, and so we honored them with our second book. They were really influential in. Neither one got to see the second book, but they were so influential in our whole lives. For me, my dad just loved learning, and so that shirt encapsulated his whole being, and it's something that I've tried to emulate. And I actually now have a shirt. It's not the same one, but it says "The truly educated never graduate," and that's something all my students now hear as well, because they know how much that summarized my dad, but also how that's just a great idea, is to never stop learning.
And Matt, I can't remember the picture. Did your dad have on a Cubs shirt or on a Bears shirt or something? You're from Chicago.
That's right. Yeah, he had a Cubs shirt on, but my favorite part about that is we've got, Kevin's dad with this beautiful shirt about education, and my dad had a hat on that said "Damn Seagulls" with all sorts of little drops on it.
He got that in Florida. Yeah, all of us snowbirds go to Florida and get one of those hats or a T-shirt that says that, right? What great memories.
That's
That
right.
is a great influence for both of you. I didn't mean to bring up something, that was emotional, but I love that quote. I love besides the seagulls, of course, I love the quote about education, because that's what we do, right? This book, when I opened it up after I saw those two pictures, and I realized immediately they are big influences in your lives, and we hope to be influenced to influence positively the lives of our students. Can you guys tell us a little bit about how you brought these books together?
So it started, the whole idea of the project started when I was living in China, and Matt was living in Colombia, and we had a 2-week Chinese New Year break. And so with those 2 weeks, I was able to visit in Colombia. We were on the balcony, just hanging out and enjoying catching up. And that's when the idea started. We started talking about all the stories that both we have, but also our friends have. And we're like, wouldn't it be cool to put these all into one place and to collect these? And then the next day, sometimes you're just chatting and like you realize like that was just a fun idea at the moment. And it was just kind of that moment, like, wouldn't it be cool to start our own business, or wouldn't it be cool to, go wherever? But then the next day we came back to that idea, and we're like, let's actually do this. This is something we can do. There's so many stories out there. there's more stories than we'll ever be able to find. And that's what started the journey. And so that was in February, I think, of 2016. And then in April of 2017, the book was published. So it took just a little over a year to do the sending out, the collecting, or the request for stories, the writing of stories, the selection of stories, the editing of stories, the putting it into a book form in both paperback and Kindle, like working on all that. And then we did the same thing in 2018. We're like, let's do it again. And it took about a year. And in 2019, the second book was released.
Okay, and Matt, you guys didn't write all of the stories. There are some of them peppered in there. I believe between the two of you, you've peppered some stories in. Matt, how did you get all the people to submit stories?
The first book was a little bit more difficult because, like Kevin was saying, you get these ideas and people are like, oh, that's really cool, but are these guys actually going to go forward with this? Are we going to really put in the time to submit a story? Everybody loves to tell a story, but not necessarily to write it down, put pen to paper. And I think that we didn't quite have enough friends out there who were interested in writing the story, and I think some of the people just didn't know whether or not we would actually go forward with it. But once we got, I think we had about 35 stories in the first book. And then the second book, we actually unfortunately had to turn some people away because we just had too many stories. So I think when people saw the first book and they, some of their friends had told them about it, all of a sudden there was an influx of people who were really excited to share their stories, knowing that it was not only going to be published and put out there, but also to raise money for that charity and give back as well. So it really worked out well, both editions. And we had talked about possibly doing a third, and then COVID hit. So that kind of delayed the process, and we're still not sure what we're going to do about that, but it could still be a possibility in the future.
Okay, I have an idea for you. You ready for this? Here's what's going to happen. You're going to have the listeners. We have we have probably 14,000 downloads now, and a lot of those are new downloads. I think you're going to be flooded. Once we promote this on ITP, I think you're going to be flooded with stories. And hopefully it will. Let me list some of the countries for our listeners that were in your first book. Just to make them even read the book, I want them to know this is exciting, because just going through your first book, the country stories are Chile, China, Venezuela, Mongolia, Nicaragua, Albania, Brazil, Honduras, Hungary, Bolivia, Thailand, UAE, Mexico, Lithuania, Belarus, Egypt, Turkey, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Pakistan, Jordan, New York, Colombia, Korea, and somebody that was not claiming to be from anywhere because she was confused after being overseas so many times. That's just from your first book. And a lot of those are not repeated in the next book, which is fascinating. And we have over 115 countries are represented now for our listeners. Kent, what do you think? Are they going to have a third book just because of our listeners? I think so. I'm giving you guys work.
I'm guessing that people just send you stories now without even you asking.
Actually, yeah, we did have an opportunity for people to submit stories after the second book came out. We had on our what was it on, Kevin? Was it our webpage maybe, or?
Yeah, we had an email link, and I think actually we would need to put that. Let's put that in the show notes. And anybody that's interested in writing a story, please contact us, and we can give some parameters on some things that we like to see when receiving the stories, as far as like length and like maybe things to consider when writing it. Because a lot of people have great stories to share, and a lot of people are great writers, but they may not have shared their own stories. And it was actually new for both of us at that point. And so we would love to be in touch, even if there is no third book necessarily imminent. We would love to collect, because we both had talked about, we feel very likely that there will be one in the future. It just may not be in the immediate future, but we want to collect as many stories as possible.
Quick question for you. You guys must have read hundreds of stories now. What makes a good story?
Great question. Matt, you go ahead.
Well, I think one of the things that Kevin and I have talked a lot about as we've seen these stories is it doesn't necessarily have to be the most interesting thing that's happened to somebody, but it's the way that they tell it. It's the way that they set the stage. It's the way that they, draw the picture for you. They make the story come to life. Most of these, as Greg was saying, most of these stories are taking place in countries outside of the U.S. So having the ability to paint a picture of what Venezuela looks like, or what Cambodia looks like, to be able to do that is a skill, and it's great for the great for the readers. And my mom loved reading the books, and she's done some traveling, but for her, it was the stories brought her to the places, and she loved taking this trip around the world just by picking up our book and reading the stories.
I fully agree with Matt. Like, a lot of people want their story, like they're like, oh, I can't, I've never been abandoned in the middle of nowhere, or like at school, like the most dramatic thing. But some of the best stories are the simplest things. In fact, in the second book, there's a story by a guy named Ken Turner, who really helped us a lot with editing and things like this. His story is beautiful. It's one of the best stories I've ever read. And it's really just about him going into a shop and buying a rug. It's not anything like dramatic happening, but the way he is framing the story, it's just really beautiful. And so I think a lot of people also try to put too many details in, and not about how much they are thinking, or like what the other person is thinking, or setting the stage. So I think those are things to really consider. It's like to pause a little bit before something dramatic happens, and to say what maybe other people are thinking, or inner dialogues, or things like that, to really paint the picture.
I like the way you guys both mentioned the fact that they don't have to be some kind of a Hollywood, theme, some kind of a super story that happened. It could be daily routine that other people will not run into just by traveling there. It's actually, these are living their stories. It's not necessarily the travel stories. These are like, I've been living in this country for so long, and I finally figured out what it really means to walk into this shop, and what the woman was saying to me for the first couple months. It's that kind of a story that you may not think it's that important, but when you really think about it and you share that story with feelings, with depth, with thought, it's a page turner, both books. You go from one story to the next, and each story is full of detail, it's full of excitement, and it's a different part of the world.
Yeah, I find that to be a really fun opportunity to learn about, Kevin and I are pretty well traveled, but to learn about countries we've never been to. And again, just by somebody painting the picture for us, so we really get an idea of what that setting looked like, or what that culture is like, what the locals are like. All of us love travel, and this is just a great opportunity to get a little more exposure through the stories.
Are there other friends of yours, colleagues of yours, that have played a role in these books? I remember in the book there was a picture of about 6 of you, maybe 6 couples. That sounds like maybe you guys get together every year or every couple years as a reunion. Were there other people that kind of threw this idea together that you featured prominently in your first book, at least?
The picture you're talking about, there's a group of us that all taught together in Korea. And every year we get together. And for the first 6 years, it was in our hometowns, but then we ran out of hometowns, and now we're going to different places. And so that is that group. One of the people that really helped us with both books, but especially the second, I mentioned him, Ken Turner. Matt and I both spent a lot of time editing as well, but he took our editing to the next level. We're proud of both books for sure. We think they're both really rich, but I think the editing in the second one went to the next level with his help, and he did that with his wife, Kathy. They were teachers that I worked with in China, and they put so much time and energy into it. And then Matt has, he'll tell you about the artists that really helped create the cover art for us.
Yeah, that was pretty neat. We were obviously trying to raise money for charity, so we didn't want to pay anybody to do anything. We wanted to see if we could get people to volunteer their talents, and then we'd be able to maximize the profit for the Children of Haiti Project. And so at my first school in Colombia, we had a teacher who actually created the cover, and he was just a guy who was an amazing artist. He's really, loves to draw in his free time. And so I asked him if he would share his talents with us, and kind of didn't really give him a whole lot of direction. He kind of came up with some of the ideas on his own, and then passed it off to Kevin and I, and we loved it, gave him a few ideas, and then he tweaked it. And then we had a couple of students at the school who were actually in high school, and they took his drawings and applied it digitally, and they were able to create the covers for us, like I said, digitally. And then the second book, we had an international teacher husband. So he's basically, his wife teaches at an international school, and he's a cartoonist. And so he goes around and travels to different schools, showing storytelling through his cartoons. And he was kind enough to reach out to us and share his designs. And then again, we just gave him some ideas. He tweaked it around a little bit, and we really love how both of them turned out. And the fact that they were volunteering their time and energy made it pretty special, so that we could maximize profits for the Children of Haiti.
There was one more person that was really key, and we hadn't thought about this till we got closer to the end, but we were both creating these books while living overseas. We didn't know what it would actually look like. So a friend of mine, David Kaline, in the U.S., we sent the first draft of the book. We're like, are the margins right? Like, we don't even know, like, if the page numbers, and he actually helped us. Like the first book, sometimes like there were things that bled over or it didn't look right. So he spent a lot of time going through it, but it's just interesting needing to have somebody besides ourselves look at the first draft of the book. But it was really, really helpful in that.
Was it harder than you thought it would be publishing a book?
That's a good question. Like, looking back on it, I think it's hard to say, because I think we both thought it was very doable. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it. We were very pleased with some of the tools that we used. It just was a learning process, but it wasn't. Yeah, I wouldn't say it was harder than we thought. It just took time to learn how to do a lot of things. There were some things that were harder, like waiting for people to turn in stories, or the editing process took longer, but we were both really pleased with how everything turned out. So in that sense, the time-wise, like being able to do it in essentially a year, that's about what we expected. But maybe certain parts took longer than others.
The amazing part of writing and publishing a book, not just writing or collecting stories, but publishing and seeing your book online or at Amazon or at your publisher for sale or on a bookshelf. If you see, I've never seen that before. I saw it on my mom's bookshelf. But the most amazing thing is that you realize, I don't know about you guys, I've been teaching for over 20 years now, and as an elementary teacher for writing, like Kent does too, teaching the writing process to kids has meant so much more to me after publishing a book, actually in life, publishing it out there. That whole process of write, rewrite, correct, have another set of eyes on it, it's so amazing. It's finally dawned on me what I'm doing with the kids. It took a long time to write the book for me. It was a different kind of project than you guys, but I love the fact that you've published a book and going through that process for you both as teachers. I bet you talk about it all the time with your kids. Like, it's a process. It's not just the end product. It's what you learned along the way.
Yeah, it's been really fun to be able to share that with students. And actually, at my last school in Shanghai, they had it in the gift shop where they sold all the T-shirts and sweatshirts and everything. They also sold the 2 books, and so we were able to get some more attention. We had some parents who came in and bought the books, and some students who were actually really excited to read, because it wasn't just me that they knew a couple of the other teachers that were also at the school who had submitted stories, and so they liked seeing their teachers get vulnerable with their storytelling, and knowing that they had gone through the whole storytelling process, as you say, the revision, the editing, everything. We were living what we teach each day, so I think the students really enjoyed that a lot.
We'll take a moment's break now to remind you how to reach out to us. Of course, you can address any negative comments to Kent, the cat guy. We do love to hear from you. If you're out on Facebook, we don't do that, but our handle on both Instagram and Twitter are at ITPExpats with an S, ITPEXPATS. As a handle, if you want to, you can send us an old email at internationalteacherpodcast@gmail.com, or you can visit us at our new website at www.itpexpat.com. www.itpexpat.com. Well, back to the show.
You ever run into someone who submitted a story to you that you didn't know what they looked like or who they were?
Matt, go ahead. You've got a good one, I think.
Oh, I was thinking you actually you've had more than me. I remember when you were in South America, you ran into a couple of people, didn't you?
I was moving from China to Argentina, and I was getting my visa. Like right when you have to go, you're getting like your fingerprints and going there. And I start talking to this woman, and she had just moved from the U.S., but she had taught overseas before. And she starts telling me about herself, and then just how great it is to be international again. And she was like, you know what? There's this book that came out that I read that's so awesome. I was like, about international teaching. I was like, what is it? She's like, The New Normal. I'm like, I'm Kevin Duncan, like one of the two people. Like I helped put that book together. It was just really fun that she was excited about the project and had no idea what she was telling me about it, because it meant a lot to her to kind of re-energize her on international teaching.
Yeah, I had a funny one. I was in Hong Kong. A couple of good friends had invited me to join them on a junk boat out in Hong Kong, and we were getting ready to cruise around. And I had mentioned to somebody that I actually had just published my second book, but I hadn't had a chance to see it yet because, as Kevin mentioned earlier, we had to send it home, have his friend take a look at it, make sure everything looked good. But I hadn't actually seen a physical copy. And all of a sudden, one of the people on the junk boat turns to me and says, "Is this it?" And she holds up our book. She had just bought it and had it shipped to Hong Kong, and it had arrived like 2 days earlier. So the first time I got to see our second book in hand was because someone on the junk boat with me had just purchased it and brought it. So it was pretty fun to have those kinds of stories pop up every so often along the way.
Ask me, Kent. Ask me the same question.
Oh, Greg. Greg is an author. Greg, have you ever run into someone who knows your book?
No. Wait, when I went home and my nephew said, "Uncle Greg, did you write a book?" Yeah. And then I handed him a copy because I hadn't seen the copies either. But yeah, I think between my mom, my dad, and my nephews and nieces, I've sold at least like one copy to my mom.
I think she bought 2 copies.
It's a new book, guys. I mean, seriously, you have to give it time, right? It's just a year old.
Well, listen, Greg and I have been working together for a long time, probably 7 years now. We've been podcasting for 2 years. I was with him as he wrote this book, and I've seen the process. We've learned a lot about each other over the years. What have you learned about each other collaborating on these projects? What's something you've learned?
I would say the best thing that I've learned about Kevin Duncan is he is one of the easiest guys to work with. We wrote both books from opposite sides of the world. The first book, I was in Colombia, he was in China, and then we continent swapped, and I went to China, and Kevin went to Argentina, and so there was a lot of communication, but I'm so impressed with his attention to details and his ability to stick to timelines. I gave him a hard time about it all the time because he was like, "We're doing this in a year. We need to do this by this time and this by this time." And I didn't always want to push that hard. There were times where I was like, we got report cards coming up. Maybe we just push it back a couple weeks. And he's like, "I really think if we can stick to our timeline, we'll be good." And we were. And I'm so appreciative of his ability to keep us on track. And, I mentioned it earlier, but he was really the brains behind this idea. He gives me way more credit than I deserve. He's a very humble guy. But yeah, we were sitting on the balcony and he came with the idea. I mean, he was like, I've been thinking about this. What do you think? And I think maybe he saw my excitement and that's why we went forward with it. But he really is just so impressive in his vision and his attention to details. And like I said, sticking to the timeline.
Matt was overly generous there, but I will say we both really work well together. We both are like responsible and communicate well, and we're also know which things that we like to divide and conquer. Going back to a previous question, on the second book, we had way more submissions than we wanted to keep it to a certain number of stories, and we had way more submissions. And Matt and I didn't want to choose the stories because there's some people we knew, some people we didn't. So we anonymized them, if that's a word. We basically took the names off them and got a huge committee. So I forgot to mention, there were 15 people that read stories and rated
Wow.
them that helped us out. And we didn't tell them if they knew the people, we didn't tell them anything. And that was what made the selection. So some of our friends' stories didn't make it in, some people we never had met. Many of those made it in. And it was really a great process. But Matt handled communicating with all of those people and organizing that. And that was a huge undertaking. And I just think, and he dealt with all the cover art, and I dealt more with the editing, and we found ways to really balance it, our work together, and we both really made sure this project happened.
I like the idea that you guys are you're both sharing the work, and you're both definitely giving credit to each other. One thing that we always have to remind ourselves, and I always remind our Matt, the family guy, is that he always says, "Oh, you did all the work, Greg," or "You did all the work, Kent." Matt has to remember, and I always remind him, he is part of the inception of our podcast. So no matter what, you guys are very humble and giving each other the credit. But Matt, it sounds like you do a lot of work behind the scenes for this also, as well as Kevin. So it's a joint effort. And I love seeing both your names on there and opening up the book and seeing all these other names. It's not about you guys. You guys feed your stories and pepper them in, but so many other people around the world are writing their stories to share with international teachers, which is what our podcast is totally about. It's like if we took our podcast and made it in writing, it would probably be a subgenre of what you guys do.
Matt had said the exact same thing.
Oh, he did? See, great minds think alike, you know? We've got another Matt on the podcast here, Kent. That's the way it is. Well, we all three of us really, Matt, the family guy, gives us the comedy. You know, he's even funnier than we are. We're just funny looking. Now, Matt is really not funny looking, and he's very funny. But Kent, of course, brings in a lot better pointed questions, and he's taking over a lot of the editing, and I do a lot of both. And just from the inception, the three of us work really well together. And we're lucky enough that we're in the same country. But if we ever do divide, and we know that at some point we will, I almost left, but we're here, and when one of us leaves, we're hopefully going to continue what you guys have already succeeded in, and that is to co-author your stories from continent to continent. And my last comment, I love the way you said you did the continent swap. Like you switch continents. I've never heard that before, but I think I do have some friends that we've done continent swaps. We just don't realize it. Your connections must be immense now. Not just running into people about your book, but do you guys have a very large contingencies of people that you know around the world now?
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. I oftentimes play 6 degrees of Kevin Duncan and try to figure out. Everybody knows
That's
the guy.
awesome.
I mean, no joke. You talk about your number of listeners, it's going to quadruple now that Duncan's on the podcast. He's a bit of a celebrity. He won't say it, but he is.
Kevin, response?
I think he's just saying I'm old and I've been in international teaching for a long time. So that's the longer you're in it, the more you know people at different places.
Yeah, that's my point. I mean, Kent and I have a lot of friends in different countries. And, you know, I bet if we sat down for about 4 hours after this interview, you and the four of us would have so many connections from your schools in the past, from the schools that we even have a connection right now where, Matt, you're going to be going to what school next? Was it, Matt, you're going to Nido?
Chile.
And Kevin, you were at...
we're not sure yet. We're my fiance Lindsay and I are looking at different opportunities, so we're not exactly sure where we're going to be next year.
Your school that you formerly worked at was a Lincoln School in Argentina. Both Nido and Lincoln are very, very popular named schools. They're very well established schools, and I have about 5 different references to each of them. However, we have a new colleague for Lincoln is leaving us and going to Lincoln this year. And she and her family are moving. It's great. It's great. They're moving down there. I actually went to a job fair. The ISS fair was in D.C. We interviewed me about that, but I met the current school head from Lincoln, and she had just hired our friend Catherine and her husband and their kids So it was a great conference for me just with that kind of a small conversation. Kevin Bacon degrees are so small in international teaching. It's fascinating. I want to do some kind of a plotting scheme where who knows who, and you could put it on a map somehow. Wouldn't that be great?
What's next for you guys? We've heard a little bit about where you're heading, collaboration-wise. What are you guys up to?
Well, let's see. Kevin is always pushing me in great ways, always challenging me. And one thing he's been challenging me on the last few years is to get on stage and do live storytelling. And so about 5 years ago, he encouraged me I had to create a storytelling night with at least 30 people in the audience, and it had to be 6 or more storytellers on a stage with a microphone, because he didn't want me just sitting around telling stories at the dinner table, because I do that all the time anyway. There's no challenge there. And so I did it, and I had the best time ever. And I started listening to The Moth, which does live storytelling. And then I got involved with a project in Shanghai called Unravel. And actually a woman who's in Shanghai started this, just like The Moth, 10 minutes of on-stage storytelling, no notes, no props, and it's tied around a common theme. And so I was able to get up on stage a couple times, and then also take over for her when she got displaced during COVID. She was stuck in Bali, and so I helped do that. And so really, that's, again, all comes back to Kevin Duncan. He encouraged me to do it, and it's been something I absolutely love.
And for our story, for written stories, we don't right now want to have a collection of COVID-only stories. We know that'll be an important part of the third book whenever it happens, and we know that there's so many stories that even the two of us have, but a lot of people have from that time. But I think we want the third edition, whenever it does happen, to include some COVID stories, but some stories that would have been in the New Normal Volume 2, like stories from schools, from just teaching, from the first day of trying to make new friends, traveling off the beaten path, the normal type of stories. We want a mix of those. And I think that'll take some time for those to settle in. So that's where we're heading.
Guys, the first time I stood up in front of an audience, I got dizzy and just about fell over. What's that like, going from behind the typewriter into in front of the audience? So what's that like?
It's exciting. There's a lot of adrenaline. You're nervous. Your biggest fear, and you probably experienced this the first day of teaching, the very first time you ever taught, is you're thinking, what if I mess up? What if I say something stupid? What if I completely forget what I'm going to say? And then your instincts take over and you start teaching. And it's the same thing with storytelling. You basically create a beginning. You know what your beginning is, you know what your end is, and then you've got a couple of key bullet points along the way. And then you just relive the story, because it's a true story, right? It's not a fictional story. You're just reliving what happened, but doing so in a way where you're bringing it to life for the audience. So I think it's amazing. And I'd love to hear, Kevin's thoughts on that.
Yeah. Kevin, before we get to Greg, sorry, Greg. So Kevin, you get in front of the microphone yourself?
Yeah. So when I was in Guangzhou, I organized several storytelling nights with teachers there from not only our school, but a couple of the other schools. And that was a great way both to hear stories, but also to connect with some of the other schools. And so I think what Matt said is so true. Like you'll feel this nervousness. And like when we've organized the storytelling nights, I try to let the storytellers choose when they want to go, and they almost all want to go first, so they get it out of the way so they can relax. So I usually ended up telling mine towards the end, not because I was less nervous. I still get nervous even though I'm organizing the storytelling night, but just because I know like they'll feel better and give some extra time for beveraging before, so maybe I'm a little bit less nervous. It is one of those things, like as long as you know what your first line is and your last line is, it really, you're going to be fine. It's just some people get up there and they don't know exactly what their first line is and what their last line is. And if you know those two things and you practice once or twice, you'll still be nervous. Like I definitely, the very last storytelling night I was a part of, I like choked up and like, I think I forgot like, one of the key transitions. but it didn't matter. It didn't matter. It was getting the story out there and sharing in the community. It's so supportive anyway. So even if I forgot my whole thing, it's just people having a good time, getting to know each other, and that's powerful. Whether that's through an official storytelling night or sitting in the backyard.
All right, you guys, here we go. I have two things. The first thing I want to do is I want to challenge Matt and Kevin. Go to educatorsgoingglobal.com is a new website that we interviewed the original founders of that website. They have collections of short, like 3-minute video stories from international teachers. So you do get a chance to think more about it. You don't have a live audience, but you have to, in 3 minutes, you have to tell a little story about going somewhere. So that's going to be a lot of fun for you if you want to submit one. They connect a lot of the YouTube stories from international teachers, and they're just building. They only published in December. So they haven't been around very long, and they're trying to build up their website. And I know Kent and I are fans of Educators Going Global, so I thought I'd plug them for a second and connect them to what you guys do, which is tell stories. So here's my second part, and I mentioned this as our warm-up. I would like to play a little game here. And each one of us is going to have to tell a story, but we don't know what country until the other person chooses. So if I choose one for Matt and Kent chooses one for Kevin, then either of you can choose a country for us.
Great.
Kevin, you're in Spain right now. Do you have a story about Italy?
About Italy, yes. I went to Florence. This was before I was even international teaching. I was just traveling in Italy. I went to Florence with 2 other guys, and one of them wanted to spend more time in Venice, so he went ahead, and me and the other guy stayed in Florence, and the other guy went to Venice, took a picture, this was back in 2001, took a picture of Julia Roberts on a billboard, and then sent it back home to everybody and said that he ran into Julia Roberts in like walking on the street in Venice. And they all believed him. But then we, the 2 people in Florence, went to Venice, but we had to catch the next train. So I've technically been to Venice, but it's only for 15 minutes. I went, took a picture on a bridge, got some gelato, and got back on the train. So I've been in Venice for 15 minutes, but technically I can check that off the list.
Yes, and you came back with a story after 15 minutes. World travelers unite. Kent, you want to try Matt?
Turkey.
Turkey. Not been to Turkey yet.
Yeah. I get 3 choices. I get 3 chances, right? How about Switzerland?
No, strike 2.
Okay.
Stick to Asia or South America, and I've probably got a lot of stories. Japan, yes. Actually, right before I moved internationally, it was the fall of 2007, I got chosen as a participant in the Japan Fulbright Memorial Fund is what they called it. And what they were doing is, after all the years of the Fulbright, bringing people over from many different countries, especially a lot of Japanese, have been able to come over and enjoy the Fulbright in the U.S. Japan wanted to give back to the U.S. by building relations in a way where they would choose 4 teachers from each state, and you'd have a total of 200 teachers representing schools around the U.S. And I was lucky enough to get chosen in 2007. And so I went, and for 3 weeks, they took us all around Japan. They paid for everything. I didn't pay a dime for anything. The best food you've ever had. At one point, they found out I loved baseball, and so we were at this high school, and they brought me in, and I started taking batting practice with all the high school guys in this school in Japan, and it was absolutely incredible. And when I came home, first thing I said is, I'm moving overseas right now. Like, I'm not waiting any longer. I've waited 8 years, and I'm not waiting any longer, because this is living. So yeah, love Japan.
Love that
Lots
story.
of great time.
All right. Who's got a country for Greg?
I do. Greg, Egypt.
Egypt. I was going up Mount Sinai in the middle of the night, and this is between like the Red Sea and Cairo. And you go off to the Red Sea around Dahab or Sharm el-Sheikh. You can go take a little trip in and go see at night. You climb up Mount Sinai and then watch the sunrise. The cool thing was, as the sun was rising, you could see the Sinai Desert. But my favorite part of the story is that we arranged and we haggled with the Egyptian guides to take camels down. And there's like 6 of us. And we decided we're going to take these camels down instead of walking down. And it was getting hot. It's like 7 o'clock in the morning. It's already hot. And I get up on this thing. It must be like 12 feet high. And I sit on it, and the saddle for this thing is like a nut cruncher, basically, if you can. I don't know another word for that. I don't know how to explain it, but it's a very deep, sharp
Family
V.
show, Greg.
No, it's not.
Family show.
So we started riding down, and within 5 minutes, the other 5 people in the group had already gotten off. The women and the guys had gotten off their camels because we're heading downhill, and we're going down the mountain, and it's just uncomfortable. I said to my buddy, I said, Paul Mooney, my buddy, I said, Paul, distract the camel guy, because each camel had like this camel herder in front, right? He starts talking to the guy, and while he's talking to him, I stand up in the camel, and I turned around, and I sat down so that my spine was basically going to take the brunt of it rather than my, not non-mentionable parts. I went down the whole way, and this guy just kept going, bad American, you sit camel wrong.
Oh, no.
Everybody that walked by was laughing their butts off at me, but I was comfortable, at least more comfortable than I was. So I went all the way down Mount Sinai and ended up giving my dad a phone call saying, hey, everything's okay. Don't listen to the news. Things happen in Egypt, but I'm in Sinai, not in Cairo. So that was my story about Egypt. All right, who's left? Kent is left. Who's going to ask Kent?
All right, Kent, how about India?
No, not India yet.
It's on the list.
It's on the
right?
list.
Okay. How about, why don't I throw Turkey back at you since you threw that one?
Yeah, Turkey. So I felt a little bit bad about this one. We were walking under a bridge, and they have the shoe shine guys, and they're not actually shining shoes. What they do is that when they see you coming, they get up in front of you and they walk ahead of you, and this is a common scam throughout Europe, I imagine. And so they drop their shoe shine brush in front of you, and you pick it up and you give it back to them, and they're so grateful that you've given this back that they give you a shoe shine, and then they charge you for it, or they overcharge you for it. Now, it would have been probably the best thing to do is just graciously accept the shoe shine and pay the going price, but I wasn't really in the mood for this. And so I kind of, with a guy with a bigger frame, I kind of elbow my way past the guy, which is fine, but it's this narrow little path, and there's this bus coming, and he almost fell in the road, and the shoe shine scam is not enough to be hit by a bus. He didn't, but I felt pretty terrible about it.
It's a family show, Kent. There's a family show.
I didn't mean any ill will. I just wasn't going to negotiate I'm the worst negotiator. If you put me in charge of negotiating the bill or anything, everyone's paying double.
And that's the show right there. Wow, what a great game. Thank you, Ken. We don't get to hear enough stories from Ken. He's traveled a lot of places, and you guys have too. You've traveled around the world. I love these kinds of stories. These are just a glimpse, but I can't imagine having to organize a story like we just did, not off the cuff, but in front of an audience, and thinking about the ending and that beginning and trying to bring all the details that are important out in your story and give a message. Like, don't throw your shoe shiner in front of a bus or... What a great game.
Is there anything else that you guys want to say about the book? You got friends internationally, you got family back home, you got future plans. What kind of final thoughts do you both have?
I'd like to start by just saying we really appreciate all the people who wrote stories for it. I mean, Matt and I, our contributions were more in organizing the stories, but our actual stories are very much a small part of the book. It is really just people from all, as you guys mentioned, so many different countries contributing their stories. And some of them are really vulnerable. Some of them are like hearing that a relative died. Some of them, it's like hard for them to adopt theirs while living overseas. Some are really lighthearted about trying to make new friends or things like this. But we really appreciate people sharing. And I think that was the biggest thing that made it a success. We just we're collecting what other people had said. So I think that's the beauty of the two books.
Yeah, and I think building off of that, one of the things I learned along the way is as I read these stories, I had a few that stood out to me that I just really enjoyed a lot. And Kevin and I would always talk about, what are your favorite stories from this volume? And we thought for sure that we knew what the quote unquote best stories were. And then I asked my mom, and she had 4 very different favorite stories. And then I asked, a friend who lived in a different country, which stories did you like? And she connected to a different set of stories, because it's all about your own experiences. It's about your age. It's about countries you've taught in or lived in, and people connect in different ways. And so that's been a really fun part of this process as well, is just seeing how so many stories were loved by so many different people. And Kevin and I try, when we hear that feedback, we try to reach out to those storytellers and say, hey, by the way, my mom loved your story. Or by the way, this teacher told me that your story was their favorite in the book. And I think that that's been really fun for the authors to get that kind of feedback from people around the world.
I want to thank both of you guys, because the idea of the book, all proceeds, once again, go towards the Children of Haiti. Buying this book, the proceeds go to that is fantastic. We are a non-monetary podcast. We're sharing the knowledge of the secret of teaching overseas, and your books share much more detail about that. And I love having all of them compiled into two books like that. Hopefully there will be a third, but I don't want to put the listeners on the spot by saying, hey, send one in to you guys, because that's not it. If it comes out, I look forward to the third one. I'll be first in line to buy it. Thank you for being on our podcast. I guess we'll leave the final words to Kent then.
Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate it.
Yes, here is our close-off. So thank you for joining us on the ITP, and look forward to soon seeing Matt and Kevin touring their story stage show coming to a city near you.
Oh, I love that. Yes, thank
I
you
don't
guys.
know. I don't know. Listen, I have this image of Matt speaking in front of the microphone, and then and the heckler in the audience being his mother.
She's my biggest and best critic.
I love that, how she has some comments for you, like, Mom, you want to edit the next volume?